Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm hoping you guys are all having a fantastic day. So in today's video, we'll be talking about a very concerning and alarming pattern that I see setting up in the longer to medium range forecast. And this unfortunately includes potentially a devastating heat wave across a central part of the country. As you can see, I have circled or pointed out to an area of extreme heat that would be potentially occurring around a week from now, beginning across the upper plains, but then kind of shifting and festering across a good portion of the United States. So recently, if you've been watching my channel, I've been making a lot of videos about the winter and potentially a cold winter, but unfortunately in that meantime, the heat of this summer is not going away. It's been already a very hot summer. A lot of areas have been breaking records, and it looks like it's going to continue. We have an extraordinary potentially heat wave developing, and it is concerning and alarming because of anyone that just works outdoors, and the fact that, yes, it's been already a very hot summer. A lot of things are stressed and tired. Let me start off by looking at the GFS 2-meter temperature anomaly. So what we have right now is a picture of the anomalies where anywhere in the blue is cooler than average, anywhere in the orange is warmer than average on this map. And you can see that this is the current time right here, 7 a.m. Well, more or less the current time, August 8th. And as I put this forward, so anywhere you would want to watch for a heat wave would be the dark reds. And there is currently heat watches and advisories across the central part of the United States for this heat we see right here. But this is not what I'm concerned about. In fact, in the meantime, you can see that there's actually a little bit of cool air that's going to be developing across the northern United States. This will be meandering its way through the northern plains before drifting into the central United States following a very stagnant and pretty much stalled out cold front. In the meantime, there will be a very hot area across southeastern Canada. If I look at the actual 2-meter temperature shaded, so the Fahrenheit readings, you can see that there's going to be widespread upper 80s and 90s across this area. If you live across the south, this may not seem like anything in particular. This may seem like your everyday, but for those areas, just to give you perspective, right here, James Bay is where already polar bears reside, right? So, yeah, that is very hot to say the least. Let me go back to the 2-meter temperature map and continue this graphic forward. So, where I'm really beginning to get concerned about is not even in the next 5 to 6 days. It's a little further out. But the signs have been consistent, and the Climate Prediction Center is beginning to issue already, I guess, early warnings about it. So we have that cold front, right? There's a little bit of cool air. You can see these blue colors, these blue dots. That is associated with precipitation development. So this cold front will continue firing away, continue bringing cloud cover, which will cool things down a little bit. So our current heat wave that we have developing across the central United States is at this point moving on into the northeast and southeastern Canada by Tuesday of next week. However, as that cold front disintegrates and loses its vigor, what takes place in that is a potential new heat wave. So by Wednesday, you can see it's a lot more mixed. The map is showing shades of orange, shades of blue, where a little bit of cloud cover, but by far the orange is a lot more predominant, and it becomes more and more predominant as we go into Thursday, August 14th, August 15th. You can see we actually begin to develop a really hot area of temperatures across the plains. And just to give you perspective of how hot we're talking about, we are talking about hundreds, potentially 105, 106, 107. These type of colors are not rare for the upper plains, but they are definitely a hot temperature reading. Let's go back to the 2-meter temperature anomaly map, and this will continue spreading towards the east. At this point, Saturday into Sunday, we have much of the United States under very hot temperatures. Notice that potentially across the UP, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nebraska, even into Illinois, Indiana, we have above average temperatures by quite a big margin. The only areas that are going to be getting relief are where there's going to be some spotty showers. You can see a little bit of cool, but those are pretty much gone within a few hours of wherever they do develop, and it looks like their development will be very scattered. Again, this heat wave continues developing into Sunday of next week. So yes, we are talking a little bit further out than, let's say, usual, but as I mentioned, the signs have been already very consistent. So Sunday and into Monday of next week, next week, if you will, 200 hours out, you can see here is the date. This heat continues proliferating across much of the southern United States, and look, it doesn't even abandon the plains. Notice there's a little bit of cool air here trying to shift its way south, but it's not going to be. The heat wave here, it looks like it's gonna not only be a very high intensity one, but a very stubborn one into Tuesday, Wednesday. Look, this thing continues. We do have more and more cooler air across the central and southern Canadian areas, but again, it fails to make its way meaningfully into the United States. A little bit proliferating into Wednesday and Thursday, but again, building across the west and shifting towards the east. So Essentially, what we are looking at is a 3 to 4 days of a definitely strong, pretty monstrous heat wave across the central United States. After that, the pattern looks to break down, but not necessarily bring a sustained cool down, and you can see the models are showing more warm air. Let's take a look at the European model. This is another model that I like to look at in terms of everything. I like to compare it to the GFS. And again, here's the date, and this is what it shows right now. We are dealing currently with some warm temperatures. And if you think today is hot across the United States, it is hot across much of the Midwestern plains, but this upcoming heat wave will be worse. Again, thankfully for those folks that want relief, there will be a little bit of relief with that cold front. Not everyone gets it. This cold front, as it shifts into the central United States, loses a lot of its vigor, and that's why it stalls out, and the cool air associated with it also dies out, and it shifts all of this warm air and squeezes it into southeastern Canada and extreme northern New England. So not really a good outcome regardless. And given the fact that this cool air really quickly starts disintegrating. So notice the European also showing several areas of quite a bit heat. Just really this concerning and alarming pattern takes up across much of the United States, from southeastern Canada to the northeast, into the west, and then into the plains and central United States, just across slightly different time frames. So note that on Wednesday during the daytime, there is still a little bit of cool air left lingering, and mainly to do with cloud cover. In the northeast at this point is baking, and we have a new heat wave beginning to develop across the west that eventually during Friday and Saturday of next weekend begins shifting into the plains, into the Great Lakes, and these anomalies are going to be rather incredible. The European doesn't necessarily show the temperatures reaching as high of an anomaly during the daytime as the GFS, but more or less still in agreement. Does shift a little bit of that cooler air across the west coast, but look at some of these nighttime anomalies. I mean, this is crazy. 7 a.m. and we have widespread 70s across much of the United States, even as far north as the northern, as the Canadian border. So the daytimes will be hot, and the nights won't provide any relief, unfortunately. Going back to the 2 meter temperature anomalies, as we go through that first part of that week, Wednesday into Thursday, the heat continues, and the European model also sticks it around for quite a while. Let's move away from the weather models now and look at more of what the Climate Prediction Center is saying. And in line with the weather models, what it's showing is an area 8 to 14 days out, right within that heat wave time frame. It's showing its probability map of temperatures being above average, and you could see they are very, very confident across much of the United States. We have, in fact, some areas almost reaching a 70 to 80% confidence of being above average almost a whole week and a half out, which is, again, one of the higher probabilities of Climate Prediction Center issues. The only areas that are going to be cooler is Alaska, the west, and that makes sense as there's most likely going to be a trough that develops there, and there is clearly a ridge that develops across much of the central and eastern United States. Looking at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, which is a little further less out, it is from August 14th through the 18th. We also have the Climate Prediction Center issuing very similar forecasts of a really above average and very high confidence, almost 80 to 90% confidence across a absolutely massive area of the United States. The only areas being cooler are, again, the western United States. Not even the western, it's more like the coastal western United States. Unfortunately, it looks like Utah, Colorado, Idaho, Wyoming, well, maybe not as much Idaho. All those western, eastern western states, the front range of the Rockies, are still going to be stuck in the heat. And again, the only areas really outside of the continental United States that are going to be cooler are Alaska throughout this whole period. So this is a pretty extraordinary outlook, and again, a unfortunately concerning and alarming pattern developing. What makes this pattern worse is the fact that there will be probably a lot of humidity with this. There looks to be quite a bit of precipitation, as you saw on some of those daily graphics. There were some blues even mixing in, but that won't help things. We will be looking at extremely warm temperatures during the night and day outside of the areas that see precipitation, which again won't be all, and very, very humid. You can see the precipitation outlook isn't necessarily dry across a lot of the United States. In fact, it favors quite a bit of activity across the south, the northern United States, potentially a little below average across the western United States and the central plains, but overall a pretty wet pattern. The 8 to 14 day outlook does show a little bit more drier conditions across the central United States, where the worst of the heat will be, which is a little more reassuring. However, the humidity levels will probably still be high. I also want to mention something interesting, and that is the fact that a lot of this humidity across the central United States, the plains, even into the south, may not necessarily even come from the Gulf of Mexico or a larger moisture source. And you may be thinking, where does it come from then? And that might be just simply from the corn plants. At this time of the year, they are at full growth. They are either tasseling or even post-tassel, and they give off a lot of evapotranspiration, which increases the humidity to quite a good amount than normal. And in fact, there are actually weather events that have occurred in August, like the derecho of 2020, that were pretty much solely sustained at one point off of the evapotranspiration off of corn plants across the central United States. So yes, that actually impacts the weather quite a bit, a bunch of corn plants and soybeans and whatnot. So that is definitely also going to be another source of humidity, unfortunately, that goes along with this heat. Alright, so the last thing I want to take a glance at right before I cut out this video and wrap it up for you guys is the GEFS. So this is another model, but it's an ensemble. So it's a group of many, many models, and it pretty much averages out the temperature outlook. Notice that right now, again, we are dealing with heat across the central United States, but as you get into this weekend, we do see a little bit of relief from that stalled cold front, but that relief is across the central United States, and the northeast and southeastern Canadian areas don't get the relief, and you guys unfortunately get heat into this upcoming early part of next week. The west also, you guys infiltrate with quite a bit of heat, so the only areas that aren't going to be seeing heat this upcoming Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are the central United States. Notice across much of the Great Lakes, Upper Plains, and even the Northeast, again, as you saw in those Climate Prediction Center outlooks, the heat wave is going to be big. And into Friday and Saturday, these heat footprints expand. During the day, potentially a little bit more cooler air working in where the rain falls, which again is very iffy because these models often overproduce the amount of rain and coverage it gets on these farther range outlooks. And notice that that heat continues. Some of these anomalies on an ensemble being this far out are pretty strong, pretty incredible. So you can see August 18th at this point, much of the United States is in heat, and this continues for a while based on these ensembles, potentially all the way to as far as we get the 384 outlook, maybe introducing a little bit more moderating, but definitely still on the warmer side. So yes, unfortunately, if you've been thinking you've been having a hot summer this year, you probably have, and most likely it will be unfortunately continuing. So that is basically it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you all on the next episode. See ya. Bye.